Welcome to Word of Faith Responds and Speaks Out. It is so good to be with you again. This is Mark Morris, and we're just glad to be here. We woke up this morning, saw a lot of white stuff on the ground. It was so beautiful, and I'm thankful we made it here. I hope everybody enjoys the wonderful snow. My daughter has a sled waiting for me as soon as I get back home. So we're glad to be here with you, and be safe out there today. Today we have a great program. You know, one of the things we've been doing for now over a month is telling you about the Word of Faith Fellowship. You've heard so much about us, some of you, and a lot of it's been so false. And we have been telling you the truth. We've been taking each false accusation, giving you the truth, so you know the truth because God wants you to know the truth in everything. And the other thing that we've been doing is we've been letting you know who we really are. We've been telling you who we're not. But we are also telling you who we really are. And today I have some very special friends of mine with me, and they're going to tell you about the miracle working power of God that they have seen in their lives. I've known both of these gentlemen for a long time. I have John Okeefe sitting next to me here. And John, how long have you been at Word of Faith Fellowship?
24 years now.
24 years. Okay, so I've been here at our church 27 years, and I can tell you one thing about John is all I can tell you is this: just stay listening because you're going to be amazed at what you're going to hear. So stay right by that radio. And this man has one of the most powerful testimonies that I've heard. John has never met a stranger. He's the kind of guy, he just walks in everywhere he goes, and everybody in the room becomes his friend. The reason why is because Jesus has totally transformed his life, and you're going to hear such a powerful testimony. I also have Rusty Millwood with me, who is a very, very close friend of mine. Rusty was actually at Word of Faith Fellowship before I was. When did you come to the church?
In 1986.
1986. And he has a wife and a daughter who is actually friends with my daughter. And Rusty is such a dear friend of mine. So we're going to hear from Rusty after we hear from John. But what we want you to know starting off is this. We want everybody to know this. It's so strong in our hearts. Jesus Christ is alive today. He is alive today. He is alive, and He's alive in our hearts. And He has changed our hearts so much. And we want to share with you everything that God has done because He is so good to us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thank you. It's just an honor to be here this morning and to be able to share what God has done in my life. And you know, at the church, the Word of Faith, God's taught us through our pastors, Sam and Jane, and the other ministers that are there, that God has a plan for your life. But they also teach us that the devil has a plan for your life. And it's whatever you choose, what path you choose is who you end up becoming, you know. And so I want to share with you because Mark said that I can go in and I can make friends, but I always wasn't that way. You know, I was born in Connecticut, and I'm one of 9 children, and so I grew up in that atmosphere. It was a loving family. My dad was vice president of a bank, so we weren't lacking. So, but at an early age in my life, and what I'm going to share with you is, you know, I chose the plan of the devil for my life for a long period of time. But the good news is I will share about what God did for me. And I was in the 6th grade when I entertained the thought of getting high would be fun. And that was a lie. But I didn't realize it back then. And I knew in my inside that it wasn't right, but I wanted to do it anyways. So I went ahead and started to get high. And I was smoking marijuana at the time. And at that time in my life, you know, I never thought, you know, heroin was like a big thing, you know. And I would never do that. And the way the devil works, though, is you can progressively get to know the devil, or you can progressively get to know God. And I was progressively getting to know the devil. So, and I will try to nutshell this because I am 59 now, and we started at 6th grade. So he would bring you along and make sure that you're associations, the people you were with were in that same vein, you know, because it was like a training. And so you were learning on how to walk into his kingdom instead of walking the kingdom of God. So from that situation of first entering into the drug world, it progressively got worse and worse and worse. And it went on for a lifestyle of 15 years. And so progressively, I got to do more. I was doing more drugs and harder drugs, you know. And eventually, I started selling drugs. And so I was in a whole lifestyle of very wicked people, and I was one of them. And so, you know, but in that atmosphere, you really can't trust people. And so, you know, I'm going to share some of the things that lifestyle will bring you to. So, you know, there was a time when, you know, I was selling drugs and everything, and there was these other guys that decided that they wanted to take my money and my drugs. And that was not a good situation. And so at that time, because of how I had learned to live, I did something very bad on that situation, and I cut a man up very badly, and I ended up being arrested for assault with a deadly weapon and intent to kill. And I'm not proud of that, but I'm very grateful that God has gone in and he's changed my heart where that my testimony, like Mark said, was that, you know, I have a lot of friends now. And so it got worse and worse, you know, and there was another situation where there was a huge crowd of people there and everything. The police got involved, and sure enough, I got involved in this, and so I got arrested that night for inciting a riot and assaulting an officer. And it just got worse, you know, and it got worse. And so I'm going to kind of fast forward a little bit. And I was married, and the turning point that actually turned me to start to seek God was my wife. And she was tired of it, you know. She was tired of living this lifestyle. So she said she was going to divorce me. And I didn't want that, you know. But the papers got proceeded and everything. And so what it was working out to be was that, you know, we had a house at the time. I was going to have to buy the house from her and everything. And she was still living in the house at the time. And those thoughts were coming to me about, you know, she really needs to see what pain is all about, because she's putting me through a lot of pain. And I knew these were not good thoughts. So I approached her and I told her, I said, I think it would be better if you went and lived with your mom for now until we straighten this out, because I don't want to do something that we're both going to regret for a long period of time. And so she did. And I did not turn to God. I still turned to my drugs, and it got worse and worse. And so there was one morning I was just laying in bed all hungover, and I heard a knock on the door. And so I got up to go see what it was, and it was my wife. And I thought, you know, what's going on? So I opened the door, and she said, I'd like to come in and talk to you. So I let her in, and she said she wanted to come back home and try to work things out. And at first I thought, no, I don't want to go through all this pain all over again, you know, but there was something inside of me, and I thought, okay, I'm going to try this again, you know. And so I made a lot of worldly stipulations, you know, signed the house over to me, and we'd have separate bank accounts and this and that. And she was very sweet about everything. She said, sure, sure, sure. So this was the turning point, though, because then she started seeking God. And so she started going out looking for churches, you know, and I did not. So eventually she was going to a church, and one night on a Wednesday night, I asked her, I said, you know, what do you do there all the time? You know, because this was very foreign to us. We did not go to church. We did not get married God's way. And so she turned around really sweet and said, why don't you just come and find out? So the next Sunday, I went to church with my wife. And that man preached the word of God, and it pierced my heart. And remember now, this is a man that's full of the world, full of anger, full of murder. And Jesus pierced my heart that day. I'll never forget it. And they had an altar call. And I raised my hand, and that was the process of me progressively starting to get to know Jesus. And I still had a lot going on, you know. I mean, when you open up your life to that lifestyle, devils come inside of you. and they start ruling and reigning. Because all the while that I was in my drugs, I didn't realize I was becoming a slave. I thought I had the world by the tail. You think you're doing this and you think you're doing that, but then when you go ahead and try to get out, you realize what bondage really is. So I started progressively getting to know God, and we eventually ended up in a church up there that was affiliated with the Word of Faith down here. And so there was a time when Mary Beth and my son, he was very young at this time, came down to a seminar down here. And so when she came back home, she had a lot of good things to say. She said, I really felt the love of God there. I really feel like, and we could just feel the drawing power of God, that this might be the place that we need to go to, because we needed help. Our marriage wasn't the best. We didn't really know how to be a father and a mother, so our son was struggling. So eventually that's what God did. He put it in our hearts, and we moved down here. Now, my son was just getting ready to go into the first grade, and the people in Connecticut were already talking about putting him on Ritalin because he was out of control. So we got down here, and there's a precious minister named, it's Sam and Jane's daughter, Robin, and Mark's wife, Holly. They're ministers in the church, and God had put my son in their hearts. And so they started working with my son and showing him the love of God. And so one day, Robin and Holly had come to me, and they showed me these pictures he was drawing, and they were very demonic. Even as full of demons as I was, I could see that this was not right for a young child like this. And they asked me, where is he getting this from? And so, I said, well, we didn't know any better. He was watching those video games and playing those video games all the time instead of us spending the time with him. And it's where he was learning all that. And so, they said, well, it probably, and I had explained that to them, and they said it would probably be a good idea to teach him not to be doing that. So Mary Beth and I had repented, and so we taught Josh that this is what we're going to do for now, and we moved on with our lives, and we immediately saw fruit. More peace came on him. He started to be more peaceful, and settled. And so we saw that they had heard the voice of God, and we saw the fruit in his life. And I'll never forget another time, we were up in the front of the church, and we were having praise and worship. And it was really sweet that day. And my son was really struggling. He was crying, and I was trying to work with him. And to no avail, he was still crying. So I went over to my pastor, Jane, and I asked her for help. I said, Jane, Josh is really struggling. I've been trying to do this and trying to do that. And so she just walked over and picked him up, started singing with him, having praise of God with him, started to pray for him. And the peace of God came all over this boy. He stopped crying. He was very joyful. He got on the ground with the other children. He was praising God, and it just took me back. It was like, I was doing the same thing, So I asked her, I said, what's the difference? And she just whispered in my ear, and she said, John, when you submit your heart to Jesus and you start to take hold of your son by the Spirit of God, he'll respond to that. But if you get frustrated like you were, he'll respond to that. And that's what you were feeling, and that's what he was feeling. And that went in my heart that day. But it's not a program, I can't just say, okay, that's what I'm going to do from now on. I turned to Jesus and I said, Jesus, teach me to be a father. Teach me to be able to hear your voice to help my son. And so, it just got better and better, And when we moved down here, we were struggling financially, and we were having problems in our, Mary Beth and I had a lot of strife in our marriage, we would go in and out of. And so there was a family that, was gracious enough to open up their house and let us live with them and start to teach us how to be a family, And there was times like, Mary Beth and I we'd go down to Gaffney. There used to be a shoe store down there, and we would go down there, to spend the day together. And halfway there, we'd be in strife, and we'd turn around and come home. But the family we were with that were ministers, they would sit down with us and they started to teach us about not having your opinion, my opinion, or my wife's opinion. What's Jesus saying about this situation? And we would pray together, and it would break the power of it. And eventually we got to Gaffney. We made it a whole trip there without any strife. It was a very joyous time. And that might sound little, but it was a big thing in our lives at the time. And so it got better and better. And so early on, though, when I was here, and I still had a lot of that anger and murder in me, and this Inside Edition came one time, and they were trespassing. They came in, they barged in on a job site that I was on with other men that were there, and there was this guy by the name of Steve Wilson. And I'll never forget this because they all came out, like I said, they were trespassing. They weren't invited onto this property at all. And so they started pushing their agenda. And so what he was doing was, he was very professional at what he did. And he was taking his body and pushing it up against this man and pushing it up against him and saying hateful things to him, with his cameraman behind him waiting to see if he could get him to respond out of anger so he could film that and then put that's what they would have twisted around and put forward, And it really bothered me, because I was full of violence, So the next day, though, Jane Whaley and Brooke Covington took their time and came on that job site because they took me to heart, and they knew what I was trying to walk out of. And they came and checked on me. And Jane asked me, she said, "John, how did you do with yesterday?" And I looked at her and I said, "I'm going to tell you something. He passed the test. I probably wouldn't have passed the test. Way I was brought up, when people treat us like this, we get baseball bats and we break their legs." And she said, "John, we don't live that way." And I said, "I know, and that's why they're treating you this way." And so, they prayed with me that day. And they put their arms around me, and at that time, the Spirit of God came, and we wept. And we wept, and they taught me to ask Jesus to put the love of God in my heart and to get to know Him instead of know this anger and this murder, because that's how I got my way type of thing, And I've never forgotten that. I've never forgotten it. And then it was times later, that because the ministers we're a family in our church. Everybody knows each other very well. They know each other's struggles, and they're praying for each other. It's not like you're sweeping it under the carpet. So you got a lot of people that are helping you. And so, I was struggling with some other areas in my life, and Sam and Jane and the ministers in our church are not Monday, just on Wednesday and Sunday ministers. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week. And I went over her house one day, and I was just sharing my heart with her about some of the things that God had been doing in my life, but other struggles that were in my life, and I was asking for wisdom because she's got a lot of wisdom to be able to help us. And so, it was really precious, and there were some things I didn't understand. So I said to her, can you tell me that again? And she took the time and she told me again. And it was just really precious to me. I've never forgotten it, And so at that point, I said, you have some very beautiful things in your house. And she said, "John, God gave me these things. And if you put Him first, He's no respecter of persons. He would give that to you." And, I didn't believe that day. That doubt and unbelief. I didn't believe it that day, and I left, And we went on, as time went on and time went on, and God was changing our hearts, You've probably heard about the neighborhoods that we live in. And I want to share with you about the neighborhood I live in. And the reason I live there is because Sam Whaley heard the voice of God, and there was land that was for sale. And he went and bought that land. And
Keep going.
I'm sorry. And he went and bought that land. And he bought it at God's price. And he didn't buy it to multiply his money. He bought it to help other people. And I was able to purchase some of that land. And the amount of money that I paid for that land, you couldn't even buy a bad used car. And so God allowed us to build a house on that piece of property. And I've seen what Jane had said come to pass, because my house is 6,600 square feet. And I was in it one day and I hear a knock on the door. And I said, "Who is it?" And a friend of mine, Mark Doyle, opens the door and says, "Jane wanted me to bring over these bar stools to see if you like them and if they could work in your kitchen. And so he brought them in and everything. And later on that night, we happened to be having fellowship over at the Whaley's house, and there was going to be a baptism and everything. And so I thanked her for it, and I told her how much I loved them, and I asked her how much I owed her for her. And she said, "John, they're a gift, and they fit my kitchen beautifully."
And just to wrap it up, we're going to switch to Rusty here in a minute. But you've heard about John Okeefe and just little things, big things that God's done in his heart, and you can just see how grateful he is that God's changed his life, God's changed his marriage, God's taught him how to be a dad. All of these things are so important to God. I have Rusty Millwood here, and he wants to share some things that God's done. Rusty actually grew up in this county. A lot of us at the Word of Faith have come from different places. John came from Connecticut. I came from California. But Rusty's from right here in Forest City. Grew up all his life. His parents were here for many years. I don't know if they were born here, but they lived here born here. So his mother, Barbara Millwood, his father, Bill Millwood. Bill was a banker for many years, and Barbara worked at, where was the place you worked?
Blanton Flack Insurance Agency.
Okay. And
a little over 30 years.
A little over 30 years. So some of you may know them. Rusty went to East High School. He has 3 brothers. And so we want you to hear from Rusty just the things that God's done in his heart.
Well, it's such an honor to be here and to be able to share with you what God's done for me. And like Mark said, maybe a lot listening may know me, but I had some struggles in my life, and right out of high school, I had begun to get involved in some things that of course my parents obviously did not approve of, and through those situations, I got into bodybuilding and steroids, and my dad had many talks with me. And I was having a lot of struggles in my life at that time, and then those steroids led to other problems, to other drugs, a lot of alcohol, and I had really gotten to a place in my life I was miserable, and I mean miserable. And I was laying on my bed one night, and I said, "God, there's got to be someone that can help me." And I was really seeking God, and of course all my friends at the time, they really didn't know the struggles I was having, and I really was praying and asking God for help, and my dad was really trying to help me, but sometimes a father-son relationship, you don't listen to your dad like you should. And so I ended up meeting Robin, Sam and Jane's daughter. We became very good friends, and through that I met Sam and Jane, and come to find out, my parents had gone to school with Jane. They were very close friends in high school, and one of the first class reunions they had gone to after everybody had graduated, and Sam had met my dad, and they became very close friends at that point, way before I was born. And I had no idea at the time when I had met Robin how close friends they were. And so when I met Robin, through that, she introduced me to her parents. And one thing about Sam and Jane, because where I was seeking God and really wanting to know God, is that they sat down and they taught me the Word. I had thousands of questions that I wouldn't ask my parents, obviously. So Sam and Jane really became spiritual parents to me, and my parents and Sam and Jane stayed in contact a lot that I did not know at the time, how much they'd stayed in contact with each other through me needing help. Because when I first started going to the church, a lot of people didn't understand, and they would say things to my dad, and my dad's comment would be, and I didn't find this out till later, would be that I had lost my son to the world, and now I have him back. And when I didn't know how to help him, Sam and Jane had been able to help him. And I'm grateful to God for my parents allowing me to be at the Word of Faith, and allowing Sam and Jane to be able to come and be a part of my life. And Robin was a special friend to me. Her and Frank, her husband, were very close, and like Mark said, he and I and his wife and my wife and myself were very good friends. And you know, my dad's relationship with Sam was, they did a lot of things together. They did a lot of hospital visits. They did a lot of ministry together, and through that, it really brought me closer to them. And you know, I still had a lot of struggles, and I was going through a lot of things, and the power of prayer. You know, our church is attacked a lot for our prayer. A lot of bad things are said about our prayer, but I'm telling you, like John had shared, I was full of demons, and the delivering power of God came into my life, and the prayer really changed my life dramatically. Words can't even describe the torment that I lived in before, and what God has done for me, and through that, I mean, it changed me so much. And I want to share a scripture with you, because I was full of idolatry. I loved sports. I idolized sports. That's why I went into the bodybuilding the way I did. I was full of rejection because I had lost my hair at a young age. And the scripture that God had really given me is in 1 John 5:21. It says, "Little children, keep yourselves from idols, from anything and everything that would occupy the place in your heart due to God, from any sort of substitute for Him that would take first place in your life." And that's when Sam and Jane began to help me with that. That's when I realized that I had put everything else first. All those things in my life I had put first were causing me to feel that torment, and they began to help me, and begin to help me see that where I needed a relationship with Jesus, that was the most important thing, was to have a relationship with Jesus, to be born again, to be saved daily, and walk with God. And through that, God really blessed me with a wonderful wife. We've been married for 20 years. She works at First Citizens in Forest City. God blessed us with a beautiful daughter, and I'm just so grateful what God's done. She's in the Christian school. I wouldn't have her anywhere else. She plays the piano. She's 13. She's in the 10th grade. And I mean, I'm just so grateful for what God's done. I mean, I can't even describe the gratefulness that I have in my heart for our church and the friends that God's given me, and what Sam and Jane have really laid their life down. We lived with them. We first got married, and my wife and I, Lynn, we got married, and we lived with them for the first 6 years that we were married, because we asked to, not because we were told to. And all the lies that are said about Sam and Jane, that they take your money, that they treat you bad, they're full of control, is not true, because we lived there 6 years. We saw their life 24/7, and I can testify that's not true. We lived there for 6 years and didn't pay a penny to live there. Matter of fact, they told Lynn and I, we want you to save your money, we want you to have a house. And that's what God's done. God's blessed us, because they have done nothing but lay their life down for me and my wife and my daughter, and I'm just grateful.
And so you had just heard from Rusty Millwood, and God has really changed his heart. I can tell you, I've known Rusty for a long time. When I first came to the Word of Faith Fellowship, I always like to tell Rusty the story, but I was 19 and walked into the doors of the church. I didn't know too many people here, but God actually just led me to this church. And Rusty was one of the first people that walked up to me. I didn't know him. I remember to this day, in our sanctuary, walked up to me and just grabbed me and just started just holding me and hugging me. I didn't know the guy, but I tell you, when he did that, I can't tell you the love that I just felt. I mean, he just held me and wouldn't let go. And, you know, it was obvious that God joined us back then in the Spirit. God knew what he was doing, and we've been so close ever since then. So I'm grateful for both these friends with me today. You've been hearing Word of Faith Fellowship Speaks Out. We're telling you the truth about the things that God's done at Word of Faith Fellowship. You can go to our website at wordoffaithfellowship.org. Learn a whole lot more about our website. Watch the videos of church members speaking about the truth. We'll be back with you the rest of the week. We're here Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, 8:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. Thank you so much.